welcome back to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through a story with a little bit more of an international bend. This one is talking about how Vietnam and the Vietnamese society are actually ended up supporting some Cuban endeavors through some nonprofit advertising that's been going through the society. And it raises an interesting question. Should we, as democratic and capitalist nations, sponsor nations that choose not to make those same decisions? Of course, we will end today with our daily delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive and ready to take on the day. There's enough rambling from me. Let's jump into our daily debate. Of all the countries that have turned away from communism, what's the first one that comes to your mind, and which is the most successful one in your mind? Love to know what your opinions are there. And Vietnam is an interesting case of turning away from a pure communist economy, but we'll get into some of the details here in a second. Let's actually read you out the headline here. Quote, Vietnamese are helping Cuba with 38 cents donations, a lot of them. So the actual point here is from the New York Times, as we mentioned, is that the Vietnamese society as a whole is actually taking up the burden of supporting Cuba. The raw amount of donations that came in over the course of these last few months is actually staggering. And I'm going to get the exact quote here. Quote, it has attracted more than 1.7 million donations, mostly from 38 cents or 10,000 dong to $38. And what is that grand total? Well, you're talking anywhere north of 13 million US dollars, which in dong, in Vietnamese culture, is actually a lot more, though I don't know the conversion rate off the top of my head. But the point being is these people have been hit with specific ads. I'll read from the second paragraph. Quote, she watched videos and read about how Cuba supported Vietnam during the wars of the 1960s and 70s, building hospitals and sending doctors sugar and cattle. Inspired, she donated 500,000 Vietnamese dong, about $19 from the modest income she earns at her family's grocery store. Quote, I feel bad that people in Cuba are suffering from economic hardship, she said. They're isolated by sanctions and their economy is cut off from the world. Vietnam used to be like that, but we are open and life is much better, end quote. And that statement alone draws the contrast. Vietnam is now open, Cuba is closed. They both used to be in this position, and yet they chose very different paths, their governments, when, especially Vietnam, it highlights here in the article, that when Vietnam was facing hardship and problems in the late 80s and early 90s, they made trade agreements with the U.S., they reopened their economy, they didn't necessarily stay sheltered and cut off and a super Vietnamese and a super communist form of economics. No, they actually allowed for more personal investment into the economy, less regulation. And Cuba took a very different approach. They still have a heavily public sector heavy economy. What I mean by that is a lot of different corporations, and let's be clear, there have been easing of these rules. We've done podcasts before about the fact that certain companies in Cuba are actually able to be fully owned. They no longer have to have licenses. They no longer have to deal with the heavy regulations of the government. The government has actually started to sell back some of the quote-unquote public companies to private ownership, but it's still a small percentage, and they are now not necessarily seeking these, though it is, of course, a part of the program, but they are getting these donations from overseas. And my question is, do you morally support this? Not do you personally morally support this action, but as the most abstract possible, should you support actions like this? If a country decides to stay closed off, if a country does not want to pursue an open market, and they continue to oppress their people through heavy governance and association with communism. And oppress is a strong word, but you can look at the dynamics across multiple countries, and countries that stay closed and keep their people from pursuing their economic goals and put lots of regulations and limitations on them tend to have a lower GDP per capita, or just tend to have a lower GDP. Now, you can make an argument about happiness, though I'm pretty sure the Cuba happiness versus the U.S. happiness on the index scale is a little bit tilted one way or another. But I'm not trying to imply that it's all about money, but opportunity is something that goes beyond simply making dollars, but providing a life, a landscape for your population to grow and not just stay stagnant. But of course, we can't ignore the part that the U.S. has played in making this situation, and it would be disingenuous of me to simply say, well, they've chosen communism and that's what's led to their struggle, and should we endorse that? We want to cover the other part of it before we actually lift that question again, that really heavy question of should we endorse this sort of support to a nation that chooses to maintain its path, even though it has seemed to fail. Quote, a U.S. trade embargo has been limiting Cuba's options since 1962. Compounding that challenge, Cuba's leaders failed to empower the country's well-educated population. In the years when I covered the island's flirtations with openness from 1999 to 2016, the best that most Cubans could do was to start a small restaurant or other home-based business that government harassed with high taxes and heavy regulations, end quote. So, of course, the U.S. has been restricting the opportunity that can go there. Now, you can make arguments about this policy or not, but the question then becomes, the country, even in the face of this, has chosen to continue down its path rather than changing its path. And should we donate to it? Should we give our hard-earned money to this country, to the people of this country? The people of this country, if they so choose, they could very well rise up against this government. And the argument would be you're creating a moral hazard by enabling this behavior, providing them with means in order to survive instead of making them deal with the dire situation that they are faced with. I think that is cruel. It's hard to sit there and say, I'm not going to give them money because I want them to rise up. I'm not going to give them money because I want them to push back against their government. That will cause endless blood and sweat and tears to be lost on top of the lives of many of the population in order to reach that political ends. But it's something that you cannot ignore. Even though these countries have made different decisions and they're allowed to, that does not mean that you, as an individual, even someone who has benefited from Cuban assistance before, are morally obligated to help these countries out. Now, here's a more personal example. Your friend gives you a loan during your hard times, and you're both people who are not well off. You're doing bad things. You have bad habits, and they give you a loan. And they assist you during your time of need. And then later on, you've recovered. You've made better decisions for yourself. And that other person says, hey, can I have a loan? And they're still in that tough place. They're still making those bad decisions. Are you morally obligated to give them that loan just because they gave you one? I think you could even say, honestly, that because that you know they're going to use that money in a way that won't be productive, you know that they're going to use that money to do bad things, that you actually have a moral obligation to not. That's just my opinion on the matter. But I think the personal example actually elucidates this situation even more. It makes it much easier of a comparison than on a national scale. But why? And now we've talked about the should. Now, why didn't really need to talk about why this is happening? I think it's interesting. Quote, her donation joined a chain reaction of generosity, a new crowdfunding campaign for Cuba led by the Central Committee of the Vietnam Red Cross Society has raised more than $13 million in its first week. So it is an actual coordinated campaign by a national organization in order to crowdfund, to give them money. This is not to deny the power of crowdfunding. Everybody can choose what they want to do, and if they want to openly give their money to it, that is their prerogative. But I think that this needs to be scrutinized, and if projects like this happen in the United States specifically, we need to be ever aware of where this money is going, what it is going to do, and how it is going to affect change, not simply enable current behavior that is not beneficial for us or for the people that we're giving it to. But hey, that's enough on that. That was an interesting take from around the world. It shows a little bit more of an outside perspective. With that, let's jump to our Daily Delight. This one comes from The Daily Bunny, by The Daily Bunny. Headline reads, all aboard the bunny train. And it is a cute photo of two buns lying down right behind one behind the other. And it honestly looks like they're doing a little bit of the limbo line or follow the leader. It is honestly absolutely adorable. If you need a little brightener in your day before you go on, this is what I would recommend to you. And if you want to check out this article or the other article from the New York Times, both will be linked in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there you can find the podcast on Spotify, Podcast, Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle at your Daily Flip, where I post links to these episodes on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and 6 and 6 on Tuesday and Thursday. We cover 6 stories from around the world in 6 minutes or less. So, with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe. Don't die.